How's it going, guys? Welcome back to another video. Today I decided to make a video talking about the PvM progression path. So starting at where you would get into PvM, so for complete beginners, learning to go all the way up to endgame. And I'm going to talk about the bosses that you should do and why you should do them, and also what you should be practicing at these specific bosses to help you get further into PvM as well. The reason I'm making this video is to help out all the newer players that constantly wanting to get into PvM but do struggle to find out where to begin. But also I do get this question asked quite a lot in comments, I get it asked quite a lot in Discord, so it is something that I think would be useful for me to make now, and then I have a link, I can just give the link to those people, and it should definitely help them out quite a bit. Now, I know a couple of other people have done videos quite similar to this, however, my style of doing things like this seemed to be a little bit different, less of a list and more of a talk through with a bit of explanation and making sure you understand exactly why you're doing this and what you should be doing at the exact point in time as well. So hopefully this video does help you out in my own sort of style, and if it does, make sure to leave a like on it. It gets suggested to other people that way, it does help out quite a lot. Also, do subscribe to the channel if you are new, and for anyone who finds himself watching each and every video, maybe consider looking at that join button by the sub button to get yourself some perks while you are supporting the channel as well. Last mention is I have a Twitch link in the description as well, so if you're interested in watching me live, there is a Twitch link there. But that's enough for now. Let's jump into this video and let's see where you should get started as someone who is getting into PvM, and how can you progress your way to endgame, to all the bosses like Telos, AOD, all that sort of great stuff. Okay, so to get started with this at all, I would probably recommend that you guys have around about 80 plus combat stats, and that's probably all you're going to need. Obviously, you're going to want some gear as well, and the basic stuff that would go with 80 combat stats, you probably have like God Wars 1 armors. Whether you're using magic, it'll be subjugation, melee, it'll be bandos, and then for range, it'll be armadillo armor as well. As for weapons, you're probably just going to be looking at the basic stuff like shadow glaives if you're using range. For magic, you're probably going to be using the Swear Elder stuff, and for melee, I think it's probably the Dragon Rider Lance at that point, or something like a Masuda's War Spear. Nothing too expensive, just pretty cheap stuff, but while it is cheap gear, it is definitely good enough to get you into the basic of PvM. Having invention unlocked as you get into PvM will definitely help a lot, as you can put basic perks on your gear. But if you don't have it unlocked, and if it's something that you want to work towards once you've done a little bit of the entry level PvM, then you can definitely do that. You don't have to have invention unlocked to do PvM at all, in all honesty, but it does make your life a lot easier. So if you're learning and there's something that makes your life easier, definitely worth working towards if you're struggling without it. But otherwise, if you want to just do like the first few levels of this, don't panic, you can unlock invention a bit later on. But at some point, you definitely should be looking at unlocking invention. As for auras, you can get accuracy auras for loyalty points off of the Solomon store. Just get whichever accuracy aura matches the combat style you're going to be using the most, or if there's only one you're going to be using, just get that. But if you do already have a few boss kills under your belt, you may have enough marks of war at the War's Retreat shop to be able to buy the Vampirism aura, which will help out a lot in certain bosses when you're learning, or even the Dark Magic aura, which is a great DPS aura to get. But if you don't have access to those yet, don't panic. The accuracy auras from the loyalty points is absolutely fine. A couple of other side skills that I would recommend you do have is probably 67 summoning. I believe this will give you access to the War Tortoise. This will allow you to take a bit of extra food to certain bosses, so it's definitely worth getting this if you have access to it. 67 summoning isn't too hard to get, and if you're really struggling on getting charms and the money as well, then use double experience, because double XP and summoning go hand in hand very, very well. Otherwise, having ancient curses with 92 or 95 prayer, 95 preferably, is absolutely going to be helpful. But if you don't have access to these, you can probably do the entry level bosses, but you are going to want to work on this. You definitely want to work on this, and you want to have ancient curses unlocked. This will take a lot of questing to do, but it's definitely worth working towards, because it will increase your damage a lot, it will increase your survivability in some bosses a hell of a lot as well with Soul Split, and it's definitely just something that you need to have for PvM. Getting 95 prayer does cost a lot of money, and honestly, it does take quite a bit of time as well. And while you can do probably the first couple of levels of bosses in this without 95 prayer, it's still worth unlocking as soon as you can. Okay, so that's basically it for all the requirements and the things I'd recommend you have before we get started. We should be able to look at our first boss now, and you should be absolutely fine with whatever gear you have to bring. So let's do that now. Okay, so we're assuming here that you basically have done barely any PvM whatsoever in the game. You are starting out from scratch. If you are not at this point, you can skip forward to wherever you want to start. I'll try and remember to put timestamps in the description. If I haven't done it, comment down below, let me know, and I will come back and I will do them for you. But because we are starting at the very beginning, assuming that you have no experience whatsoever in PvM, you are going to want to start at God Wars 1. Now, these aren't real bosses in my opinion anymore. At this point in the game, with evolution of combat and all of the gear spikes and all of the power creep, these bosses have just become big mobs that you can smack, and honestly they're not too difficult. However, they do have a use for you guys at the beginning, and that is one, getting used to being in a situation where you can take a bit of damage without being stressed out, which is going to be helpful. Honestly, this is something that you definitely need to do, because entering a boss for the first time can actually be quite a stressful thing. You're sort of thinking, I'm just going to die, I'm going to lose all my stuff, and honestly, don't worry about that. We're going to be using practice mode throughout this whole thing. But the main reason you would want to come to God Wars 1 is just to get used to your basic DPS rotations. Now, a lot of you are probably going to be using Revolution. That is absolutely fine. You do not have to use full manual. Revolution works perfectly fine, and throughout this whole video there is not a point where I would suggest that you don't use Revolution, because if you want to do that, if you find it more comfortable, if it makes your life easier, then do it. I know plenty of people who are better at PvM than me, and they use Revolution. I use full manual personally, but again, you do not need to use that. Of course, if you do want to learn full manual, then go ahead and do so, but you absolutely don't need to. But anyway, what I would recommend doing is, depending on your combat style, and if you only have one pick to begin with, I would suggest that you come to a specific boss depending on what that combat style is. If you're using range, then I would recommend you unlock Kriara, and then if you're using melee, I would recommend you go to Bandos or General Grador, and if you unlock magic, then I do recommend that you go to the Zamorak boss, or Krill. I can't pronounce his full name, it's Krill, that's all I can say, but that's where I'd recommend you go if you do have magic gear. Now, as I said, these bosses are just going to be basically to get you into the position where you are happy going into a boss room and not stressing out, but also just to practice your DPS rotations. That is all these bosses are here for. That is all they're going to be useful for. They don't have any mechanics that you need to worry about. It is literally just put your prayer on and go to town. Now, I'm not going to tell you guys in this video how to kill all of these bosses. That would make it last so damn long. Imagine putting a guide for every single boss. What I'll suggest doing is, once you've picked your boss, have a quick YouTube search of a guide for that boss, and honestly, I'm pretty convinced that someone will have a guide on it. Hell, Protox will probably have a guide on every single one of these bosses. He literally seems to not miss a single one. So go ahead, have a look at that. Figure out what you need to do for that boss, and then go ahead and give it a shot. With the basic gear that I mentioned before, you shouldn't have any issues with this. They will, of course, in the guides as well, talk about what gear they recommend doing, and I've probably shot a little bit higher than them as well anyway. If you need to look at things like DPS rotations and revolution bars, what I would suggest you do is look on the RuneScape wiki, or ask in my Discord. There'll be plenty of people in there that will happily help you out with that too. But look on the wiki as well, see if you can find any suggested revolution bars, and you'll be absolutely fine once you've got one of those set up. Now, at first, you will notice that your DPS and your kills are probably going pretty slow, and you might be thinking, this is taking a while. These are really low bosses, but it is still taking me a while to do. That is why you are here. That is exactly why you are here. You want to get in the habit of using things like Sunshine or Death Swiftness. If you're using melee, then Berserk, and just making sure that you try and figure out the best way to do your DPS rotations. You're going to want to use your ultimate abilities that boost your damage, such as the ones I've just mentioned before, and then you want to build up to using things like your thresholds and getting as many as those off as you can while you're in that DPS rotation. However, at first you may not get this right every time, so don't stress out, don't panic. It does take time to learn, and eventually you will notice that you'll do little things here and there to increase your DPS and get faster kills. Once these kills are coming through consistently, coming through fast, and you're using a lot less food than you were when you first got here, then that's when you want to look at moving on to the next bosses. If you do hit a wall of DPS and you feel like you're still getting slow kills and you can't improve, then there's absolutely no harm in having another YouTube search, looking for DPS guides, rotation guides on the combat style you're on. It will help you out definitely, so if you feel you need that, then go ahead and do so. Okay, so once we're done at God Wars 1, once you're in a position where you feel like your DPS has increased or has improved from when you started going there, it doesn't have to be great at this point, it just has to have got a little bit better. You know what your abilities do now a little bit, you know how to put them into action, you know how to use things like Sunshine, Death Swiftness and Berserk, and you know that you can do specific things to get a little bit more DPS than when you first went to God Wars 1. You're comfortable with your main thresholds and how to put out DPS basically. Now, what you want to do after this is go to God Wars 2. God Wars 2 is going to be your next stepping stone from God Wars 1. However, even though it isn't just a simple, tiny little step. God Wars 2 has bosses with mechanics. They are a lot more difficult, and you will have to be paying a lot more attention, and you will also start using defense abilities. In God Wars 1, you really didn't need to use any defense abilities. You may have included devotion at some point, maybe, just to help you out a little bit if you went that far while learning the bosses. However, you didn't need to use them. It was something that you just did to help you out a little bit more. However, at God Wars 2, you will absolutely be using your shield, you will be using defense abilities, because it just makes your life a lot easier. Yes, you can eat your way through these bosses, but do you want to bank every kill? Definitely not. So the very first thing I would suggest you guys do is get aware of your defense abilities, figure out what they do, have a read through them, and just get a little bit more familiar with the ones that you're going to be using. The main ones that you're going to be using in God Wars 2 that you can focus on without overwhelming yourself on all of them is Resonance, Devotion, Debilitate, Anticipate, and Freedom. These are the abilities that you will be focusing on the most in this, and yes, it was quite a few, but there is others in there that you don't have to really pay attention to just yet. But if you fancy, I do have a defensive ability guide on my channel, so I will put a link in the description, and if you find it easier to learn that way, then go and give that a watch. You can skip to all the different abilities as well, and that might help you figure out what all the defensive abilities do a little bit easier than just reading through them. Okay, so now that we know we need our defense abilities, that also means you're going to need to bring with you a shield. From now on, no matter where you go, you will have a shield with you when you do PvM. No matter what boss you're doing, you always bring a shield. Even if you're at a boss where you think, I probably don't need this shield, just bring it. Trust me, that one inventory space, that one space for a shield can actually make you get a kill if you don't have enough food, because using a shield can absolutely equal more than about 3 pieces of food easily. Okay, that was a bit of a longer intro to God Wars 2 than I thought it would be, but you know what you need to do now. Let's go to God Wars 2, and where do I suggest you start? So out of the 4 bosses here, there's only really 2 that I would suggest you bother working with, and the first one is going to be Vindicta, and then after Vindicta, we'll be moving you on to Helwyr. However, in my opinion, Helwyr is quite a bit more difficult than Vindicta, so we will definitely start with Vindicta. You can use any combat style here. If you have range or magic, you don't have to use melee. You can come here, you can use any combat style. They all work absolutely fine. At this point, it will help to have the 95 prayer unlocked, but if you don't, this is the last place that I would suggest you come before actually unlocking this, because it will make learning PvM a lot easier to have this. And if you don't, you're going to be sort of throwing yourself at stuff that, yes, you can do it without it, but it makes your life so much easier to have it. And as a learner, you definitely want to make life a bit easier for yourself. If you're someone that likes a challenge and you want to be able to prove to yourself that you can do it without it, go ahead, keep going, but I would suggest that you do unlock 95 prayer. Okay, Vindicta time. Let's talk about Vindicta. Okay, so Vindicta is going to help you out with learning quite a lot of mechanics, and it is also going to help you out with using your defensive abilities too. You're also going to be increasing your DPS here as well, so every single time you do a boss, you're going to be getting better at DPS. That is always going to be background. I won't mention that again, but that will always be there for you to figure out and sort of work on. And you will do over time. Don't panic about it. Just let yourself work that out as you go along. But Vindicta is going to be great for defensive abilities, for using resonance, for using the right prayers at the right time, for making sure you're in a good position when you're doing the boss, and paying attention to mechanics that are coming up next. This is such a good step to actually begin getting into real PvM. Vindicta is such a good boss for beginners, and I always recommend it. Like I said, this is not going to be in Vindicta guide, so if you do want to go into this, then I would suggest you go and look one of those up as well. However, I will be talking about the mechanics that you want to be here for, the reason you come to this boss, and the way you're going to be dealing with them, because that is the reason you've come here, and that is the reason that you actually want to be doing this boss, to be able to improve at PvM. Okay, so Vindicta does a few things that are going to help you out on learning, and the first one is attacking with more than one combat style. Now, once he gets to a certain point of health, he will jump on his dragon, and he will start attacking you with his dragon. It will hit you with melee first, and then it will be ranged, and then he will go back to melee. So if you're camping protect melee, which I would probably suggest you do while you're getting used to this boss, if you have soul split, maybe just wait a little bit, just use protect melee, and then try out soul split once you're used to the fight. But if you're camping protect from melee, then you're going to want to switch to protect from range whenever that ranged hit is about to come. The reason being is that ranged hit can hit pretty damn hard. So you're going to be getting used to switching from melee to ranged prayer and then back to melee. If you forget that, don't worry, you'll get a nice reminder that you should have done it when it hits you for about 3,000 or 4,000 damage. So don't panic, you will get a good reminder, eat a bit of food, and then just make sure you're back on your melee prayer ready for that next hit. However, this ranged hit mechanic is actually one of the main reasons that you are here, because you're going to be using 2 different defense abilities on this as you are learning the boss, as you are getting a bit more comfortable, and those abilities are Resonance and Devotion. Now for Resonance, you will need to use a shield switch, but Resonance will heal you for any damage you take rather than you taking the damage, which is absolutely great, especially on a big high hitting range hit. Now once you have enough practice, you can make this boss take no food whatsoever to do. So what you want to do is when that range hit is about to come, you want to switch to your shield and then use Resonance, and then as that range hit does hit you, it will heal you rather than doing damage. Now the reason you're going to be using Devotion as well is because every second range hit that he does, you will not have Resonance ready. So to deal with this, you'll be using Devotion and changing to the range prayer. This will just make sure that you take no damage from that at all, because Devotion makes your protection prayers 100% effective. So you will take no damage from anything that you're protecting from, and this is something that you're going to be using a hell of a lot in PvM in the future. After he does his range hit, he will do one more melee hit, and then he will fly away and he will fire another line of dragon fire at you, which by the time you've got to this point in the fight, you would have seen a couple of times anyway. Just make sure you're not stood in that, step to the side of it, or if you're feeling really confident, you can surge towards him, and this will actually get you out of the flames most of the time as well, while also putting you in combat range too. Once he's landed and done the fire, he will go back to doing one melee hit, one ranged hit, one melee hit, fly away. That is the rest of the fight. That is all he does for the rest of the fight. So all you're going to be doing is practicing your resonance hit when he does the range hit, and then when he does the second range hit after he's flown away, using devotion and making sure you've got your range prayer on. Don't forget to change back to protect from melee, or else you'll get that nice reminder of the 2 or 3k hit from melee, and you don't want to be getting that. And then again, it's just dodging the next line of fire and making sure you get out of that. Like I said, the best way to deal with that is honestly just surge towards him. But if you're not confident with that yet, just step to the side, get out of it, and he actually will make his way back over to you so he can hit you with his melee damage. But that is what you're going to be doing here at Vindicta, focusing on using resonance, using devotion, the right prayers, and making sure you're out of the fire. This is all you're going to be doing at this boss. Along with improving your DPS, there's not much else you will be learning here. However, this is a lot to learn on your very first main boss. You've got your resonance switch, which is going to be using a shield and then putting your weapon back on. You're starting to use defensive abilities and having to time them correctly. You're prayer switching. There's a lot to learn in this first boss. So keep in mind this is a big step up from God Wars 1, and if it does take you a while to learn, don't panic, it's okay. Now we're going to talk about Helwyr next. This won't take as long as Vindicta did, as it's quite similar to this one, but there's just a couple of other mechanics that you will be learning from here too. So as mentioned, Helwyr is a little bit different than Vindicta. There's a few more mechanics to learn, but it's definitely something that you want to learn before moving on to bigger bosses, as the next boss that I'm going to be talking about is probably going to be Araxor, and getting comfortable with Helwyr, learning all those mechanics will definitely help out in that boss as well. Okay, so once you're confident with Vindicta, you're happy with the fact that you're changing your prayer at the right time, you're happy with using resonance, and you're also happy with your positioning, because positioning is going to be key here at Helwyr, then maybe it's time to move over. So once you are here, you're going to want to take into account a few things. This boss will teach you about positioning, it will teach you about using your defensives again, but in a further way. You'll be using debilitate, devotion, resonance, and freedom while you are here, and these are all abilities that will be useful during this fight and a lot of fights in the future. So the first mechanic that you're going to have to pay attention to is something where he says nature aid me. He will throw down some pools on the ground of these acid looking things, and you don't want to be in those. If you're in it, just surge away from it or walk out of it. They slow you down and they do damage over time. This is the mechanic that you'll have to figure out your positioning with, so you'll get used to this. Just stay out of these, make sure that you're not in them, and if you are in them, then just surge away and make sure you're away from them. Next, Helwyr will go on his back legs and he will say you will bleed. This is one big massive melee hit. He swipes you with his claws and it does a big amount of damage. It also applies a bleed effect to you, but we'll get to that in just a second. To deal with this big melee hit, this can actually make Helwyr absolutely foodless once again, but it is basically like the ranged hit at Vindicta. So what you're going to want to do is, as soon as he says you will bleed, put on your shield and use resonance. This will make that big melee hit heal you instead of doing damage, and once you're more comfortable with this, I would suggest taking your melee protection prayer off while you're resonancing this hit. That way you will heal a lot more than if you had the melee protection on, but when you're getting started, keep the melee protect on, because if you miss this, if you mess it up, then it will be a big hit. So if you have your melee protection on, it is definitely a lot better to do so when you are learning. This is going to be the core of your kills though. This will make your kills a hell of a lot easier if you can figure out how to get the resonance timed right for this and make sure you can heal off of it. You can literally do this with barely any food, and once you are a lot better, once you're a lot more experienced with this boss, you can absolutely no food this boss. Once he has hit you, you will notice there's a bleed effect on you. You will take typeless damage over time, and to remove this, all you need to do is press freedom. So once you've used resonance, just hit that freedom button and this will be gone. Next, he's going to start attacking you really quickly with lots of swipes. He will jump towards your location and swipe you loads. You can either use melee protection and use devotion here. That's going to completely remove the damage that he will do. It'll block all of it, and you can just stand there and sort of wait it out. Or you can surge out of the way and be nowhere near him. If you can put distance between you and Helwyr, you won't take any damage from this. However, it is important to keep in mind that this is always going to come fairly shortly before the next nature aid me ability, which puts down those pools, which you may want to use surge for. So a good way to deal with this, in my opinion, is once you've rezzed the big hit, a few attacks later, just get ready to use devotion, and as soon as you see him jump towards your location, hit devotion, and you can basically stand there and take it until it's all done. Once that is done, he's going to summon some wolves, so you can use some AoE abilities to kill those, or you can just completely ignore them. Using debilitate throughout this fight at this point is probably not a bad idea, as it will reduce the damage that you do take, so just remember to use that when you can. Then once the wolves have been summoned, the next thing he's going to use is the nature aid me. You're going to want to surge out of the way, and then you basically repeat this fight over and over again. This fight is really good for helping you learn to use your shield switch. Don't forget to switch back to your weapons though, as you will be doing a lot less damage camping a shield, but using resonance on your shield switch, using devotion when he does the melee swipes, using the surge to make sure you're not in the pools, using freedom to clear the bleed after he does the big swipe, all these things are going to come in great use once you move down the line of PvM a little bit more, and you will be using every single one of these skills that you are learning right now because they're used through a lot of different bosses. So I'll suggest you stick around here until you've got used to using all these abilities, not making any mistakes, timing resonance right, and making sure you're in the right position. Make sure that this boss is nice and easy, and then move on to the next boss, which I'm going to talk about now, which is Araxor. Okay, so once you're happy and comfortable with Helwyr, you're probably in a pretty good place to actually move on and learn most bosses in this game now at this point. Because you know how to use defensives, your DPS is definitely going to be a lot better than it was when you went to God Wars 1 at this point, because getting through these fights help a hell of a lot to have good DPS. So what I would suggest you do next is move on to Araxor. Araxor is not only a great boss for you guys to make a lot of money at, there are so many mechanics here that will actually just lead you into endgame bossing that there's literally like one more boss after this that I would recommend you do before you start learning any boss at all. Araxor is going to have a lot of stuff for you to learn. It is going to be a big learning curve, but you will be using all the stuff you've learned from Vindicta and Helwyr as well, and it will make it a lot easier for you to do so once you actually get here. If you came here without going to those other bosses, you would have so much to learn straight away, so doing those is definitely worth your time. However, Araxor will need you to be using Anticipate and Freedom on a rotation throughout the entire kill, so getting used to using those is definitely something that was worthwhile at Helwyr using Freedom. And also, using abilities like Devotion and Debilitate is going to reduce the amount of food you use here by a hell of a lot, and I would highly recommend that you do get into the habit of using those while you are here. You'll be using abilities like Surge and Bladed Dive a lot here as well to get to certain mechanics like the eggs and the bomb that comes from the ceiling, so you'll want to get on those and make sure you're in the right position for that. And then not only that, you'll also be using things like resonance to be able to heal back from the web. You may want to use reflect, for example, as well if you put a bleed on the web and you want to reduce the damage that you're taking from that. And then the last phase of Araxi, you will actually be using a prayer flip between magic and range, assuming you are using magic or range yourself. If you're using melee, then you have to go between melee and magic. However, using devotion on this last phase will save you a lot of food. It will save you a lot of life, to be fair. Like, it will stop you from dying so many times, so you definitely want to be using that while you're learning here. But also, you will have to be putting out a good amount of DPS at this boss to make sure you get to the end without running out of food. So there's a lot to learn here, and I suggest that you do come here after doing Helwyr and Vindicta. And like I said, it will be a big learning curve, but once you've got this boss down, once you've figured it out, you can pretty much move on to almost any boss in the game at this point. What I will suggest you do next, though, as the last sort of step into getting into any sort of PvM that you want whatsoever, is I would suggest heading to Nex. Nex is going to be a different fight altogether from Araxor. You will still be using some of the same mechanics as you would here as well, of course, as you will be using your freedom and stuff like that, Anticipate in the first phase, and then you want to be using devotion and debilitate throughout the fight as well, especially while learning, just so you can reduce that food usage. And then you have a phase on the blood phase, which is purely about doing as much DPS as you can. It is a DPS check, so that will definitely teach you a lot about rotations as well there. And then not only that, on ice phase, you've got the ice prison to deal with, which is using freedom, using a vitality potion, or on the second time, if you get a second prison, using resonance, making sure you're on full health. You will have to be using your defense abilities. It will force you to get into these bosses properly and learn them properly, rather than just be able to go in, do as much DPS as you can, and hope that you get to the end with some food in your yak left. Once you've managed to get through Nex as well, then I would say at this point in the game, you are in a really strong position to go out, learn any boss that you want to learn, and make sure you use things like guides as well. Make sure you use any sort of information that's available to you on how to deal with the mechanics. But you're in a position where you're used to using defensive abilities. You're used to using a good rotation when you use things like Death Swiftness and Sunshine. And with those core foundations, you will be able to actually put the time in and learn any boss in the game at all. Of course, some of them will be a lot harder than others. I'm not saying you can learn to solo Araxor and Nex and then go ahead and just do Telos. Trust me, that's a massive jump, but you know how to use Resonance to deal with the hold still. You know how to use Reflect to deal with the anima fonts in phase 4. You know how to use Devotion to reduce the amount of food you're going to be using. You'll be learning to use things like Surge to time and dodge abilities that way as well. There is always going to be new mechanics that you will have to learn, but you're in a position now at this point where you can actually go ahead and learn those abilities, and it won't be too new to you to the point where you're like, holy crap, I've gone from just standing here and using Revolution in God Wars 1 to having to dodge mechanics with Surge at Telos and use Resonance to deal the Hold Still and Freedom to make sure I don't get stunned. There's a lot of stuff that you will have to learn from one to another if you just do a jump like that. So following this path should get you to those positions where you can have all the knowledge that you need to know to learn bosses, know what the basic abilities do, to the point where when a guide explains that you're going to be using this ability at this time, you know why you're doing that. So at this point, like I said, you're pretty much free to go off and learn any boss that you wanted to learn as long as you put the time in, and are aware that you won't just go there and do it in one go. It still does take time, but at least you know the basic foundations. But anyway, guys, that's going to be it from me today. I hope this video has helped you out. Let me know in the comments, has this video been of use to you? Have you found that you may have been in a position where you didn't really know where to start in PvM? If it has, let me know. I'll be very interested in hearing. And of course, it'll be awesome to hear that you guys have managed to get into PvM from this as well. But anyway, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like on it. Do subscribe to the channel if you are new. Twitch link in the description if you are interested in watching anything live. And as always, thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll see you all in the next one. See you later, guys. Bye.